So last week, kind of that message, the theme of looking at faith as Christians, we live with that faith, that trust in Jesus and faithfulness in Jesus. And today I want to talk about, as we kind of look at our readings, that as Christians we also live with commitments. Not just commitment to the church or to Jesus, but really our lives as Christians, how we are committed to each other. And so talk about being committed and what that word means and how we see that, especially played out in the lives of Christians and in the community of the church. Today being LWL Sunday, and seeing the commitment we see in our women and our ladies here at St. Michael and what they provide for the church in the sense of leadership, and especially more importantly in the service of the church. With all the quilts that our ladies make year in and year out, how many quilts did we make this year? Someone can shout it out.
She's got
200,000? What?
156.
156. Okay, I was going to say 150. So 156, and that's usually about average. 150 to 175 on a high end, 200 on a really good year. But every year they make these quilts. And how long have the quilters been doing this? That I don't know really. I mean, 20 plus years?
You don't know either.
You don't know either. They've been doing it so long.
Started it and have all passed away.
They've been doing it forever. And that's an act of faithfulness, a commitment that here are these group of ladies every Tuesday morning come together pretty much 52 weeks of the year. And they take a few weeks off here and there in between, that's okay. But every year, throughout the year, they sell these quilts. And every year in October, we send them off into Lutheran world belief to be used all across the world as an act of love, again, an act of mercy, as we fulfill that goal, that vision of mercy, our targets as a congregation, and just the act of, again, of caring for our neighbor. And then by extension, like Lutheran Women's Mission League, for the past 75 plus years, 77 years, that this organization has been in existence, and really beyond. If you go to the early inception of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod to the 1850s, there's always been women's societies that will come together to do acts of charity and mercy for the people in their community. And what the Lutheran Women's Mission League has become this national, and in some cases global effort of raising funds every year. And every year those funds are given out to different mission endeavors and missionaries, and mission activities are happening in our local area and throughout the world. And it's, again, that sense of commitment to the work of the church, commitment to the gospel, year in and year out. And as time goes on, to remain committed as faithful Christians to what is important. And that is our walk with Christ, and to witness Him to the world, to be caring to our neighbor, to love our neighbor as ourselves. That's that essence of commitment. And so being LWL Sunday, I want to bring in the story of Ruth into this mix. Actually, Ruth was the side Old Testament reading. But her story becomes another great example of one who shows great commitment to Naomi. If you know the story of the Ruth, you go through it real quick just to remind you. But Ruth was a Moabite woman. Naomi and her husband moved to Moab during the time of famine in Israel. And their two sons married Moabite women. And unfortunately, because life is tough back in those days, Naomi's husband died, her two sons died, and she is just left really destitute with her two daughter-in-laws. And so Naomi tells her daughter-in-laws, go back to Moab, go back to your people, you're still young, you're still pretty, you still be able to get a husband. And if you really think about it, back in those days, that's really how women survive, is really, get married and have a husband who's going to protect you, support you, and care for you. And so Ruth and Oprah had that opportunity, and Naomi, she's old, aged, going back to Bethlehem, where she came from, and hoping that someone there would be able to take care of her. And so Oprah goes back to Moab, but it is Ruth who stays by her mother-in-law's side and refuses to go back, and it stays committed to her. And then there's that eloquent speech she makes that your people with my people, your God would be my God, and where you go, I will go. And it is a great blessing that Naomi has with Ruth, that this lady is going to stick by her side, and together, hopefully, they will survive. And as the story goes on, they do go back to Bethlehem, and then Ruth meets Boaz, and it all works out. Boaz marries Ruth and takes care of Naomi, takes over her land, and provides for her. But it's really that act of commitment. That's kind of the message, if you will, from we get from Ruth, is this lady's commitment to Naomi. And as time goes on, we come to find out that Ruth, this Moabite woman, becomes the ancestor grandmother of Jesus.
David.
Well, David, but then onward, eventually to Jesus. But yes. You're all right. Good job, everyone. Okay. But the point is that quality, that virtue of being committed. There's something, I mean, we don't know what this means, what it means to be committed to something. It's not just necessarily a Christian thing. I think it's a human value thing. Even outside the church, people understand commitment, that when you make your promises, when you make your vows, when you are just that unwritten rule that when you are involved with something, when you're responsible to something, you have to be committed. And so we see that value in many aspects of our lives. First and foremost, in our families. We see it in marriage, that what marriage is that commitment. A husband and wife who make that commitment to each other, of faithfulness, of love, and be committed to each other until death do us part. That through riches or poor or sickness or health, with the ups and the downs that life will give to us, that in the end of the day we will remain committed to each other. And then by extension, parents' commitment to their children. The parents make that unspoken promise that when you are blessed with a child, that you would be committed to that child, of raising them and loving them and protecting them, watching over them and feeding them, raising them in a household that is filled with love and caring and kindness. In commitment, and we see this in the fourth commandment, those who are in confirmation class, we're going to be talking about this today, but the fourth commandment is that act of commitment, first of child to the parent, that of showing love and honor and obey your parents, that act of commitment, and again by extension that we all fulfill that fourth commandment in our sense of commitment to those authorities above us, our commitment to our bosses, commitment to our government, commitment to those who are there to provide for us, that we show honor and loyalty and obey, that sense of commitment. There's a commitment just in society, in the social norms, if you will, that we are committed to other people. Obviously, we're committed to our friends and living in that friendship, in that community with others, but just that commitment to our society, that we contribute to society, that we're not taxing on our society, that we work. As Paul says in 1 Thessalonians, if you don't work, you don't eat. There's this idea, again, not necessarily a written rule, but this unspoken rule of society that we are committed to each other in sense of service and helping each other out when someone is in need. We should be the ones that will provide. And of course, as I was saying in the beginning, there's that commitment to the church. By virtue of our baptism, by virtue of our relationship with Jesus, and as I talked about last Sunday, that we live with faith in Jesus, we trust in Jesus, there's that response of being committed to Him, committed to the gospel of Jesus, that we stand firm on the gospel of Jesus. We stand firm on that truth that Jesus is Lord and live that out publicly in the world. Live it boldly in the world. That we are committed to the church and the advancement of the gospel and the kingdom in this world. And so talk about, and I think they'll understand that. We get what commitment is all about. We understand why it's important. And we ourselves are, see the value when someone's committed to us, when they will stand by our side and go the extra mile for our own needs. But what's the problem with commitments? When the going gets tough, get going, is that how you say it? I don't know what that means. What does that even mean? Is that even right? Anyway, I'm having a problem this morning. I forgot to put my contacts in, so all I see is a bunch of blurry people. I don't even know there's anyone here really right now, so I feel like honestly, I feel like I'm preaching by myself in my office or something. But anyway. The problem with commitment is that when things get tough, we are quick to bail out. And that's one of the first things. One of my first lessons growing up. What I do, I join the football team. Football gets tough. I'm just a little guy. It gets tough. It's hard. I get hurt. And what do I want to do? I want to quit. I don't want to be part of this. It's not fun. I thought it was going to be fun. It's not fun. It's actually a lot of work. They're yelling at you all the time. They're telling you to keep going and work harder. And it's just hard. And I want to quit. And what do my parents tell me? No. You join the team. You're committed to the team. You have to stick it out all the way through. So that's one of the first lessons I learned, that think before you start doing something, because there's again that unwritten rule, that unspoken rule, that when you do something, we set up to do something, you have to be committed to it all the way to the end, and that gets tough. It also gets tough when you are committed to one thing and it starts to involve something else that you're committed to. And that's where we run into problems. Is that when there's conflict, when there's problems, we begin to question that commitment. We're all we follow as human nature the Ohm's law. The electrical guy. Remember this: voltage equals I times R. So voltage equals amps times resistance. Is that right? Who's my electrician? Is it Jim? Is that right, Martin?
Right.
All right, so what does that have to do with human nature? I'll tell you. What does it do with commitment? I tell you, is that basically, I hope I say this right. If I say it wrong, don't say anything right now. Just pull me off to the side. But basically, when there's resistance, we will go to the path of... Yeah, is that right? All right. I'm not an electrician, I'm not an engineer, I'm a pastor, so I'm just going on. I just looked this up on the internet this morning. But that's the point, is that we will follow the path of least resistance. Water does that, electricity does that, everything in nature does that. And by nature, as humans, we want to do the same thing. So that when there's resistance, even though we are committed to go down a certain path, if there is an easier path to follow, we will make every justification why we have to go down that path, even though we're supposed to go down this way. And that's our struggle with commitment. And so we see it in marriages. That's why we have divorce. Even though early on, when you stood up before the altar and you looked at each other and you made those vows and those promises, I will stay by yourself until death parts us. And yet over 50% of people will break those vows because we will follow the path of least resistance. Same thing with what happens in the breakage of families, and not just marriages, but families or kids to their parents. What happens in our society? It's easy to be committed to someone. It's easy to be friends with someone, until that friendship becomes burdensome. When perhaps that friend that you was great, they were fun to hang out with, they brought joy to you, they were just an enjoyment in your life, but also now they become tough. Maybe they got involved in stuff they shouldn't. Maybe they make bad choices, or maybe something negative happened to them that you don't want to reflect on you. Also like, well, I'm not going to know if I'm going to be so committed to you as a friend now. You see it in the church. It's great to be part of a church that is growing, that the pastor is preaching with good sermons, that everyone gets along with each other, there's no issues, but the second that there are issues, or the pastor becomes boring, or there's problems, we begin, well, we go and look for maybe somewhere else. Or I will be part of this fight with this organization. We all done this. And don't sit there thinking like, yeah, I know what you mean, Pastor. I see a lot of people break their commitments. Well, if you're saying that, you've probably done it to yourself. We all done this. We all do this. Especially when it comes to our faith in Jesus. It's so easy to follow Jesus when it is convenient for our time, for our space, for our psyche, for all those things. But as soon as following Jesus becomes inconvenient, we'll begin to justify why we are not in church anymore, why we're not in devotion anymore, why we follow other faiths or other religions, because that's more popular, it's more acceptable. We all do this. And so that's why, first of all, we as Christians, as brothers and sisters in Christ, that we always will pray for each other, encourage each other in that commitment. Because one thing about being committed to something, you can't do it alone. Because it is going to be difficult, it's going to be trying. We're going to want to follow that path of least resistance. And so first of all, let's encourage each other and be committed to each other, to stay committed to the gospel of Jesus. But above all, and you guys know this, but we need to be reminded this daily, who's committed to us for all eternity. And that is, of course, Jesus Christ. I just want to read that one section from what Paul writes in 2 Timothy. He says, this is a trustworthy saying, so I'll repeat it again because it is a trustworthy saying. He says, if we died with him, that is Jesus, if we died with Jesus, we will also live with him. And if we endured, we will also reign with him. There's this aspect of commitment. When we live in that faithfulness, when we live in that commitment with Jesus, there is a blessing. But if we disown him, he will also disown us. And if we are faithless, Jesus will remain faithful, for he cannot disown himself. And on the other side, though, when we do struggle in our commitment and our walk with Jesus, it is Jesus who will always remain faithful to us. And that's the gospel of Jesus. That's the grace of God. And that's what we all need in our lives. For the least of us and the greatest of us, we need to be reminded of the faithfulness of Jesus that he has for you. And this goes all the way back to the parables that I shared with the parable of the lost sheep, lost coin, of the sinners that Christ was going to minister. This is what Jesus came in the first place. He came to those people who are not committed to him. He came to us. It was out of his great commitment and his faithfulness to us that we find our salvation. Jesus is committed to you. So much so that he went to the cross for all of us to take on those sins of not being committed, of our failures, following the path of least resistance, following the broad road that leads to destruction. He went to the cross die for all of that. In this very day, he comes to be committed even to you right now, because he shares his very body and blood to you. And so in our celebration of this morning, in our praise this morning, let's give thanks to the commitment that Jesus has for all of us. Amen.